Art is not about money. If you're in art to make money, you're in it for the wrong reason. I think we have way too much stress. There's an overabundance of stimulation. The right art calms that. It's far from, just graffiti. It's always about the message. Whether it be, as simple as their name, or whether it be a huge mural, or whether it be, Andy loves Jamie. It's still a message, and it's still somebody trying to say, I was here, and I had something to say.
It's nice to see you. This is Amy Cosper, the Get Busy podcast. I'm here with Sket One, artist, graffiti artist, influencer in pop culture. And I wanted to take the first little bit here to talk about your background in graffiti and sort of the influence that urban landscapes and cityscapes, what influence they've had on your career as a very, very successful artist.
I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut on the East Coast. And growing up in New Haven, I it's very close proximity to New York City, where my father worked. And I would visit my father on the regular in New York City. So I would take the train from Connecticut to New York City. And that's where I started getting exposed to graffiti on a visual level. That train ride was it was covered. And then once I got to New York City, riding the subways to wherever I was going around the city, I was being exposed to graffiti. It made me, at the same time, hip hop was, this is 1985, 1986. Hip hop was really starting to become like, full blown part of, teenage culture and stuff like that. So, on top of, the graffiti going on, there was skateboarding going on, there was hip hop going on, there's so many things. Punk rock was going on. So graffiti just kind of played a part in all of those other genres of, cultural influence that I was taking part in. And I was already drawing as a child. And I just gravitated towards graffiti right away.
It's can we talk about graffiti for a second and the role that it plays in our culture and pop culture and history? Because I think a lot of people misunderstand what graffiti is, and it is not a new phenomenon. I mean, it's been around since the pyramids in Egypt. It's how people express themselves politically, economically, socially, and so it's not just paint on a train that we're talking about here. So can you give us your perspective on graffiti as a pop culture art form and historical marker?
It's always about the message. I think the artist and the graffiti artist and whoever's doing, using the word graffiti is always, the government name, right, for the art that's created. But it's far from, just graffiti. It's always about the message and what the artist or what the person is trying to get across, whether it be, as simple as their name, or whether it be a huge mural, that somebody painted for, a specific reason, or whether it be, Andy loves, Jamie. It's still a message, and it's still somebody trying to say, I was here, and I had something to say. And I think it's important. I think each person needs to do that and has done that at least once in their life. Somebody has done, some kind of graffiti. The graffiti aspect that I went off into was more of graffiti is, I've always thought of it as such an egotistical art form.
Wait, but why, Stet? Like why do you think it's egotistical?
Because it's just your name. It's your name. You're like, Scheme said it the best, I think. He goes, it's not there for the normal person. It's for, all the other writers and all the other graffiti people out there that see your name and know that you were there and that you bombed it. And it's just this, I'm going to get my name up as many places as possible, as big as possible, all over the place until, it's at the end of the day, it's just marketing. It's self-marketing. Yeah. And I think that's why I took to, doing marketing so well, is because I pretty much got it. Graffiti is branding before branding was actually a term.
Yeah, it was also like the first form of social media, right? It's how the messages got out there. And I interviewed somebody that Mez Data, when I was in Austin a little while ago, and he was talking about, and you know what, and I mean no bad mouthing of Mez Data, but he's much more into the throwies, right? Like the different stages that illustrations become graffiti and the meaning. And so when you bring branding into the discussion, this goes in a whole different direction, right? So can you, I interrupted you, but can you keep that flow going?
Yeah, totally. It's, so here you are, and you're a graffiti artist, and say you live in this town or this city, and you say, okay, I'm going to go hit this spot, this spot, this spot, this spot, and there's a certain, there's certain areas that you're up in more than other areas, and there's a term that we have in graffiti called all city. And the objective was to get around your city as much as possible in all these different areas. And when you think about it, it's just, advertising placement, that's what it comes down to. It's just, I'm going to hit this billboard, or I'm going to hit this, side of the highway, or I'm going to hit this. And you fight for those spots, coming up as a graffiti writer. Somebody might go over you and you have to go back and get it back. So there's this, constant, my objective is to advertise myself in many places as possible, and to hit and to what's the word I'm looking for? To just cover and blanket, the area to the point where people are like, who is Sket? And it's funny because you sit there as a graffiti writer most of your life being like, I don't want people to know who I am, but I do want them to know who I am, which is like this constant battle of, well, what do you want? Do you want people to know who you are, or do you want to be hidden behind the shadows? And you look at artists like, Banksy and stuff like that who've done it so well, and I guess it's even harder today because you would figure with social media and us having a phone in our pocket and being able to do so much stuff, that someone somewhere would take advantage of this situation and try to expose that artist. But when I go back to the branding thing, me as a graffiti artist got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm good with me doing graffiti and me getting my name out there as a graffiti artist, but how can I expand on this? This was before the internet, and the only way you could expand was to travel and to go to events and go to jams and stuff like that. But when the internet came about, that's when it all changed. The whole culture of graffiti changed.
How did it change? What was that impact?
I'll start off with graffiti is taught, it was handed down by people. You just didn't pick up a book and start doing graffiti. You had to know an older graffiti writer, which would kind of mentor you and show you how to draw certain letters and certain styles. And those styles of lettering were geographically created. So if somebody was from New York and they were from the Bronx and they were brought up by a Bronx writer, they would have a certain flair to their lettering. And somebody in Minnesota was brought up by somebody in Minnesota. They were giving a set of alphabet or a set of fonts that, once again, it represented a Minnesota style. So when graffiti came about and the internet came about, and people started uploading pictures from all over the world, all these different geographical styles started getting kind of put into a soup, where a writer from Seattle could go online and be like, oh, I like that writer from Australia. I'm going to take this picture and copy his graffiti. And that's kind of just, before I could meet somebody and they would show me their black book and I'd be like, oh, you're from Boston. I could tell from your crew, first of all, and then I could tell from your lettering. And that was something that was very lost once the internet came about, because now, you'll have a kid in Australia doing a New York style, and you'll have a kid in Italy doing an LA style. And it's beneficial because it also spread graffiti around the world, to parts that maybe never had access to this graffiti before. But at the same time, there was an essence of the art form that was just lost.
I mean, it brings up a really interesting discussion because, that the internet, 1990, AOL dial-up, joke of the day, all that shit that my dad was doing. Talk a little bit about how AI, right, if the internet fused together the accents of graffiti, what is it? What are your thoughts on AI and the impact on your art?
I can see the benefits, and I can see, the terrible, that everyone talks about, the absolute end of creativity as people talk about it. But I see AI as a tool. I've used it, within, not for my art personally, but I've used it in working on jobs that I've had. People want specific things, or they, I was working on, I am also a creative director for a marketing agency. And I was working on a particular promo for a new event that was being held in South Florida that was a Christmas event. And they didn't have any photographs of this particular event. But we needed photographs, of course, for all the promotional stuff. So I went on, the usual stock photography, and I wasn't finding anything specific, that I really wanted. So I turned to AI, and, I typed in my prompts, and I got, pretty amazing images. Yeah. And it served its purpose. I was like, okay, that worked. And I'm thankful for that. But then I thought about it. I just took away a photographer's job. I just took away models' jobs. I just took away, the actual event. It's just, I created this false image of these people that don't exist. But at the same time, I would always use photography from the actual event if I had it. But in this case, AI was beneficial. But, I see a lot of my friends being worried about AI coming along and taking their style and what they do and using it to create images in their particular style. That's scary because, us as artists, we live off of what we create. And, and that's a piece of our soul, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And if, technology is just going to dip and take whatever it wants from us when it wants it, it's what is it going to be left for us and us artists? So.
Right. And the next generation of artists, too. I'm wondering, Stet, can you go back and talk about your, I don't want to leave people with the wrong impression here, because you're not just out painting buildings and train tracks. You have had a career trajectory, and you are an influencer in, toys and art. Star Wars is a huge influencer for you. You went through this really weird Star Wars phase. And I just wanted to, get your, a little bit more on your journey and what you've learned as a creator, and really, why creativity is so important to our world and our culture and our economy, because you are a walking, talking example of why it matters and how you can impact the world. So let's start. Like I interrupted you with my AI grenade. So like let's just take a beat here and talk a little bit more about your journey and even your advice for young artists and creatives.
I started off doing graffiti within high school. From doing graffiti, I went on to college up in Boston Museum School of Fine Arts. I spent time up in Boston, still doing graffiti, but, doing all the art school things. And then when I came home back to Connecticut, I ended up getting, I think the next job that I got was at a factory screen printer. And I say factory because that's what we were. We weren't doing T-shirts and stuff like that. We were doing blenders, and we were doing like car mats and things, products that were not, textiles, not T-shirts and not clothing. So it was everything but that kind of stuff. So it was really interesting to learn all that screen printing. The factory that I worked at was called Sirocco Screen Prints. And it's where Warhol and Lichtenstein went. They would come up to Connecticut and actually print at this particular place.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So when I learned that, for me, I want to say I was around 18. That like blew my mind. And upstairs we had a bunch of old prints, but they weren't signed or anything. They were just like test prints and doubles, and they would always overprint stuff. And it was really cool to work at that. And I have a lot to thank for that factory, because I got to work with a lot of old equipment that's not even used anymore. So it was like, I look at it now and it was a blessing, because I came up cutting ruby lift, which you definitely don't do anymore. And there's a bunch of screen printing stuff that you don't have those steps anymore. So from there, I ended up getting a job at a sign shop. And the sign shop, I was brought in by my friend Chris, who was a neon bender, which is an amazing art form in itself. And I would put the gas into the neon for him. So I was an assistant, I guess, neon person. And I would have my workbench in front of me, and I just covered my workbench in illustrations and graffiti. And the owner came in one day, and he was like, "What are you doing in the neon room? You should be in the graphics room." And he put me on the graphics department, and I started off doing patterns and sign painting and some like a lot of things that aren't even in play anymore. But at that exact time, computers started up. Like, it was the early 90s, so they had a machine called the Gerber machine, which would cut vinyl lettering, but it was used with all mathematical equations. You'd have to type in the equations, and then the computer would cut the vinyl. So I worked my way up, and I became the art director of this particular sign shop. I learned how to use all the machinery there. I learned how to cut on a big ESOP table. You cut aluminum letters and bring it out to the welders to weld. Learned to make patterns, cutting vinyl. Some of the clients that I had were like Old Navy and Gap, and we would do all their signage. And I learned a lot about blueprints and a lot of stuff that I would have never learned in school. Never. And I think that's a very important thing. I think if I had to tell a young artist, I would tell them to find a field that you can gain knowledge on and get paid for it. Like, if you start off at a job at, say a low level pay, and but you're gonna ride it out at that job for at least 4 or 5 years. I think that like what you're gaining in knowledge and the skills that you gain you can't even pay for nowadays.
Yeah, it's kind of like I agree with you, and I encourage the startups that I work with. Like, sometimes you can like doing these lower level things. It is a paid education. It is an opportunity to become a master, of a subject. And so you can't like I'm so happy that you said that because, it's sort of like the old apprentice days in workshops of the masters. And I just think that, we live in such a short attention span, immediate gratification culture that is often overlooked. So I think it's an important point.
I think, yeah, work ethic is definitely being lost nowadays. People have been, expecting to, make money instantly from something or some other because they saw it on some show and stuff like that. But, building yourself up in your knowledge of self and what you're capable of doing, I think is very important. And I did all of that at the sign shop, which then brought me to being able to turn to the marketing group that I work for. And I came in once again, as an entry graphic designer. And I have learned so much. I've literally have designed everything. I don't think there's one object I haven't designed. It's been a blessing because another thing, once again, if you find something that you like to do or you're good at, I went into 3D sculpting and started to play with that, when the programs came out. I just because you're good at graffiti doesn't mean you have to stay at graffiti,
Or anything, really, not just anything in life. Yeah.
Try everything. Like, no one's expecting you to be great right off the bat, but try it because you never know. You you might love it. And if you love it, then definitely do it, because that's what we should be doing. Working for the marketing firm, that's when I was really like, okay, I get what we have to do here. This is, coming up with campaigns and concepts and, discussing, the end results and what we were looking to do. Each and every client that we had, it was always like the challenge that was the fun part, It was like, okay, let's do it. Let's see what we can come up with. And over the years, I've gotten to work on just amazing clients, all the sports agencies. Orange Bowl is one of my longest running clients. I've done so much stuff for them. Everything from logos to on-screen graphics to you name it. Field mock-ups, you name it. I've done it all. But every client you do come across, there's always going to be those ones that like, I got to work on this one client, Sedgwick and Cedar, which is a clothing company. And it was based off of old hip hop clothing. Huh. And this was years after, this was almost 10 years after I started. And I got to meet Cool Herc and I got to meet Grandmaster Kaz and I got to meet all these idols, that I grew up like idolizing. And I got to work on this project and it was just, it was like all worlds coming together, and those are the projects that, I've done in the past and I strive to do nowadays with my own art. I try to collaborate with other companies like Jinro or like Sriracha, to do fun, different, and other campaigns that people are not expecting, and exposing people to like, the world I'm from, with designer vinyl. And it's been fun because a lot of people never heard of it and they come over from, liking the brand side of things, or vice versa. The designer toy people might not have never heard of this product and they come over to the product. So it's brought together those two worlds and And that's what I like doing. I like bridging the gap between commercial art and actual creative, fine art, so to say.
How do you do that? Like that's, like, because you've got your purists and you've got your, the commercial sellouts, right? Like some people in the creative, like, are you a sellout? Are you pure fine art? Right? How do you blend the two of those together? Because I think it's a struggle for a lot of our creatives.
If there's that authenticity there, if it's not forced, like
Right.
I've seen things that are forced. They don't make any sense. It's like, why is that particular artist or that celebrity supporting this particular product? It doesn't make any sense. For me, Sriracha and what I was doing with, the Dunny at the time, I created consumer products. I was mashing up, ketchup and the Dunny, and I was taking other figures like Mad L's and making them into mustard containers. And it was kind of like, I did it to send a message about what was going on in the vinyl toy world, where it was getting so popular that all these different products in the vinyl toy world were coming out. And it was like walking into a supermarket and you could just pick what toy you wanted, because there was that many toys and it was getting overwhelming. So that was kind of my message by mashing the products with the vinyl toys. But then it got to the point when I was with Sriracha, I was just like, I dig Sriracha, and it has a very cultural, the crazy thing about Sriracha is they don't have a marketing department.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they sold, like, have you ever seen a Sriracha ad anywhere?
No, I haven't. And yet I know the brand so well because it is so distinct.
Yep. And that blew my mind, because that just goes to show you how the grassroots branding of Sriracha is so strong. And, it being, mashed up with me, fans of Sriracha would be like, he gets it. Like, he's a fan also. So it's like that authenticity. Like when I did it with Jinro, Korea has a huge amount of Korean artists that are in the vinyl toy industry and have created vinyl toys and has done stuff. So being able to be the person to mix, the Korean liquor with, vinyl toys was another authentic thing. It wasn't anything that we were, I wasn't, making a joke or making a statement. It was just another way to show people, hey, let's do something fun. Let's do something different. So when we did that with Jinro, there was nowhere to buy the product. The way we did the promotion was you had to take part in a contest and you could win the pieces. So that's what brought together the community and the product.
For people who don't know, can you talk a little bit about the vinyl toy market, right? Like it sounds unfamiliar, I think, to some people.
No problem. So the vinyl toy market, I would say, started around the late 90s. If people are very familiar with artists like Cause, Frank Kozig, Futura, they were going over to Japan, and they were seeing people like Eric So and Michael Lau. And these were people that were taking their own sculpts and painting them and selling them at toy events over in Japan. And Japan has always been a major influence on Western vinyl. And around, I'd say, 1999, I would say Cause was, starting to produce his own figures and sell them in small boutiques in New York. And I know Frank Kozig was working with Bounty Hunter, which is another Japanese brand that was creating these small sculptures or toys. They're referred to as toys, but I see them more as like, three-dimensional sculptures, because nobody necessarily plays with them like toys. They usually just go on a shelf and are revered as art. So as it started to trickle into the States, Kidrobot was formed, and Tristan Eaton, who is also a very well-known artist nowadays, created the Dunny and the Kidrobot logo for Kidrobot, which was the actual Kidrobot figure. I met Tristan in 2003 at an art show through a mutual friend, and I knew Tristan was going to be there showing our friend the toy that they were working on, which happened to be this wizard toy, Cheech Wizard, for Mark Bodie. And that's how I was introduced to Tristan, and then got involved with doing toys for Kidrobot. So I would say the early 2000s is when it started moving over to the West Coast, and it became really popular. Like it really started to like gain steam, I would say around 2006. There was a huge show in New York called the Dunny exhibition, and we did these 20-inch Dunnies, and they were all customized. And that was the first time customization came over to the United States. And for me personally, it was like, oh, so I can get a blank toy and I can make it whatever I want.
Right.
And that's when the floodgates opened for me. I was like, oh, I'm just going to do this from now on, instead of working on a canvas or creating some other piece of art. I got really into custom toys, and just started creating these custom pieces. And from there, my particular 20-inch Dunny was actually purchased by Whoopi Goldberg. And I had pieces bought from Chad Hugo from the Nerds. And I had pieces that were being bought by other high-end, buyers. And it was just very, it caught steam. And now it's just almost, it's been 20 years now, 25 years. And I think it's more common, Kidrobot has come and gone. Other companies have come and gone, but it's grown over to the point where now artists are, we have all this 3D printing, and we have all this technology now that you really don't need to go to China anymore and make your own toys. You can literally sit at home and produce your own product, make your own packaging, and sell it yourself, through the internet. And being an artist of that era, it's great, because you literally, what you wanted to do, 20 years ago, you can now do today.
Right. I was going to ask you, going back to what you said earlier, you were talking about how hip hop, punk, graffiti, like this great fusion took place in the 80s and sort of propelled you and your start. How do you stay inspired now? And how did those early influences, how do they now represent in your art and your life, really?
Lichtenstein is definitely one of them. Jasper Johns is definitely one of them. I would even say, Jackson Pollock and Andy Warhol, of course. But there's a lot of artists, Scene, which is a graffiti writer. He's a huge influence. A bunch of the FC writers, which is a crew in New York. A lot of the color stuff I do, and the different elements that I use within my art, you could see that they come from different artists. I'll definitely color palettes, come from graffiti. That's one thing graffiti really did, was gave me a really decent color theory, background, because every time you get up to do a graffiti piece, you have to figure out your outline, your fill-ins, you have to figure out your background, you have to figure out all this stuff and how it's going to look. And you really don't have any other idea except, spraying it on the wall and putting it next to each other and being like, okay, that's going to work. That's going to vibrate, or, that's not going to work. There's not enough contrast. But those artists have always been a huge influence on me, I would say.
Why, right now at this point in our history, as twisted and fucked up as it may be, talk to us about why art matters right now.
Art matters because it can take you places where you need to go. And what I mean by that is, just gazing at whatever you're gazing at is going to release something within you that you need released because of the outside world. I think we have way too much stress. There's way too much anxiety. There's way too much, there's an overabundance of stimulation, and art, the right art, calms that. Going into a museum, you get the feeling that you get because of the art and because of the museum, and because everyone is doing what they're supposed to be doing, and that's taking in the art. And when you feel like, I personally feel like when you're sitting with art, it brings you to a good place.
It does. And what about, your advice for youngs, the youngers who want to seek their careers in art and the creative industry and the creative economy, but are discouraged because there is no money to be made? What do you say to those young creatives?
Art is not about money. If you're in art to make money, you're in it for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
If you're an artist and you want to become famous and you want to make money, it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of not even hard work on just doing your art and creating your art and getting it out there. It's a lot of hard work on yourself internally, because art takes time. You're constantly creating, and what you're creating today, it might not have anything to do with what you're creating in 5 years.
Yeah.
It's not something for the lighthearted. It doesn't. I remember, I would draw even if I wasn't, if I was home, I would be drawing. If I was on the phone, I'd be drawing. I would just always be drawing. And I feel like you have to have a passion for it. It's not something that you could say, oh, I'm going to become an artist, so I'm going to make money at.
Right.
There's probably only, 10% of artists that actually succeed at doing that. So I go back to where I was saying, do something that you love to do within art. I did screen printing, and I did, signs, which then turned into, graphic design and marketing directing and stuff like that. You could look at that as all art, or you could look at that as all, commercial, being a worker and, just doing a job. So I guess it's the out view. Look at what I've always done is I've balanced my life, and it's always been, I've have this to fall back on if this doesn't come through. And if this doesn't come through, I have this to fall back on. It goes back to the whole thing of don't settle on one direction. Goes back to also, don't put your eggs in all one basket. It's as long as you stay creative, you'll be a successful artist. And as long as you have passion, you'll be successful. It's just, it might not be, your vision or what you expected. I never even expected to be, an artist. Like,
but here you are. And you've been so generous with your time, and you're in Las Vegas, and it's hot, and that you have this. We were just talking a second ago. You have this joy about you that is absolutely infectious, and I think the listeners will really glean a lot of advice from your and wisdom from your conversation here.
I hope so. Don't get deterred.